Hello, hello. Welcome back. And this time we're not talking about cyberpunk or streets. We're talking about animation. And we're going to be doing a walk cycle today, as you probably surmised from the title of this video. So before we actually start animating, there's a little bit of kind of baseline information that I want to cover. The first is going to be talking about reference. As with anything, in 3D, it's usually a good idea to have some reference. So there's a few different points that you can look to for a walk cycle. The first is yourself. You can walk around, you can walk in front of a mirror, you can record yourself and kind of just see how you move, see how other people move, pay attention to other people in real life as they're walking, and think about how their relative body proportions affect how they move, how their mood affects how they move. If they're in a hurry, how are they walking? Is that different than if they're taking their time? That sort of thing. You can also use the magic of the internet and YouTube. There's one channel in particular that I found that has a playlist of walk references in often in slow-mo. So here's just a dude walking from two angles. Now it's got a grid overlay, so you can kind of see how things are moving. You can really pay attention to how the knees bend and when they bend. Take a look at the ankles and the contact points, all sorts of stuff like that. And then there's another reference, and this is kind of the way it was originally described to me is like the Bible of animation, of character animation. It's called the Animator Survival Kit. It's by Richard Williams, who was the animation director on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He was a guy who learned from all of the original Disney animation masters, so he's got a ton of knowledge. The book itself, I actually have it sitting next to me. I usually, anytime I animate, I pull this book out. It's 380 pages. It's just got a ton of great information in it. Let's see if we can. It's not going to let me look into it. So it's 35 bucks paperback on Amazon. That's for the expanded edition, which has a couple of extra chapters. I highly encourage you to buy it. And even if you don't, the internet does exist. I'm not telling you to find the free PDF online. You shouldn't do that. But as a preview, we can look at what this looks like, and we can kind of see how this works. So there's a bunch of kind of initial animation intro stuff, bouncing balls, some nice anecdotes, and just really good information about animation. And then as we get further into it, there's a lot of breakdowns. Let me zoom out even more. Yeah, there's a lot of breakdowns of regular walk cycles and more character-based stuff, communicating emotion through walk cycles. And then it's not just walk cycles too. It's we get into other actions, how arms swing. There's jumping. There's other types of movement. All sorts of stuff. And just kind of emotion and acting through animation. It is a absolutely fantastic reference. And I highly encourage you to check it out. So I will actually have, that's one of the references that I will have open is this book, this page in particular. It's 108 in the book, it's 114 in the PDF. But this has a really nice breakdown of a walk cycle. Now, I should also note that we're not going to do something quite as extreme with the poses. Normally, when you're walking, you're not going into a lunge. This is a little bit more exaggerated, as he calls out right there. But it's nice to kind of get a sense of what the different phases of a walk cycle are, especially the way that we're going to be animating it, which is with keyframes. We're not going to be animating every frame on 24 frames a second. We're going to be animating the keyframes and let Blender automatically interpolate between them. And we can adjust those interpolations too. But I just wanted to kind of give you a breakdown of how this is going to work. We're going to animate these key poses. We're going to flip them over to the other side and let Blender do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So that's kind of the what we're going to be animating, or the, yes, it's part of the what. We also need a subject to animate, and that's where this character comes in. His name is Bali. You can get him for free from blendswap.com, created by Tom Bombadil. It's a free Creative Commons attribution license, so you just have to shout out who made the rig, and that's what I'm doing right now. So thanks, Tom, for that. And when you download it, this version actually has two files. It has one that has animation already in it, and it has one version without animation. Now, obviously, we want the version without animation because we wouldn't, like, what's the point of watching this video if you're just going to use a pre-made animation? You won't learn anything. Yeah, so here's what it looks like. And yours actually will be a slightly purplish hue to it, but we'll talk about that later. It's a pretty straightforward rig. It's great for kind of a first walk cycle because there's no upper body, there's no arms to worry about to complicate things. It's just going to be legs and essentially hips. I think the rig, what is the bone called? The bone's called the torso control. So but you can think of this as like it's just hips and legs. So it'll keep things nice and simple. Okay, so I'm not going to go over all of the kind of basic animation stuff. I'll just kind of talk about it as I go. So hopefully you have a little bit of experience animating in Blender, but we will certainly cover some new things, and I'll try to be as descriptive as possible, as per usual. I tend to be long-winded in these sort of things anyway, so no reason to stray from that now. Okay, so let's open up a new scene, which is what I have here. And we're not going to animate in this scene. We're going to leave this one alone. We're going to animate in a new scene, and we're going to link the rig in. So I'm going to delete the default objects, and then I'm going to go to File and Link. And what we want to do is we want to navigate to our Bali file. I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to go into the collections and choose the Bali collection. Okay, so this is the master group that has everything in. I'm going to click Link, and it's going to pop up in our scene. Now, why did we do this? Why don't we just animate in the original scene? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first, and probably the most common, is if you're using this across multiple scenes, then if you need to make a change to the actual character or the rig, you only have to change it in one place in your original file, and then every file that it's linked to it will automatically update. So we can see that here. You can see I don't have any material options here, but if I go to my original file and go to my materials, I can change my base color. Maybe we want it to be green. I can click Save, jump back over into my other file, and then we just have to reload, which actually I need to save this first. So let me Command or Control Shift S, and we're going to call this Bali walk _ record. You can see that that's not even close to record. You can see that I've already done this a few times. Practice makes perfect, or at least better. Okay, so now we have that saved. If I file and open and just reload that, you can see that the color is updated. And it'll update that in every file that is used, that has been linked in from this original file. Now I'm going to go back to orange because I prefer it. I'll save it, jump back here, File, Open Recent, and reload that. Okay. So we got that. Also, it can help make the scene a little bit lighter. I've been told, I've not tested it myself personally, but that's the way we're going to work. It's a very common way to work in animation, especially in 3D animation. Okay, so we've got that in and linked. I'm going to go back to my original file and just close that so I don't have that open in the background. And now we need to set up our scene for animation. You can see that we don't have a rig. We don't have any bones to animate, so we need to make those. And the way that we do that, and this will happen with just about any rig that you need to bring in, is we need to make a proxy rig. So we're going to go to Object, Relations, and Make Proxy. You want to choose Arm Bali, and what that stands for is not arm as in like on your body, it stands for arm as in armature. So we're going to click on that, and it's going to bring in our rig. Now I should also mention, with any pre-made rig that you are loading in, you will oftentimes see a prompt for a Python script that'll pop up. You will need to run that script in order to have some controls for that. So if you see that, just click OK, run the script. It should be fine, as long as you get your rig from a reputable source. And this is a reputable rig, so we should be fine there. Okay, I'm going to hit N and bring up my side panel. I will be using this frequently. I will also turn on screencast keys. I'll do that. Whoops, I'll do that now so I don't forget. Okay. I'm going to hit T and I'm going to hide my tools over there. I don't need those. I'm also going to click on this, hide my gizmo. I don't need that. In my viewport overlays, I'm going to uncheck extras, and that's just going to hide that empty crosshair object. Okay, that was just in the way and I don't need it. So I got that out of the way. Okay, I'm going to select my rig. Say not the body, but the actual rig here. And I'm going to hit R, Z, 90. I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees. The reason I do that is so if I go into front view, or one on the number pad, I can see the right side of my character, and then 3 will show me the front. I do that because I want the character to be facing this way, because just about any reference that you'll find will have the character facing this way. All right, even in the reference video, you can see that that's the direction the character is facing. In the Animator Survival Kit, that's the direction the characters are facing. It's just kind of a standard thing, so it'll make it a little bit simpler. Instead of trying to mirror everything in your head, you can more directly follow the reference. Okay, so we got that. Now, to actually start animating this, we can't be in object mode, we need to be in pose mode. And to do that, you can either go up to this top menu here, and you'll see because we have a rig, an armature selected, we only have 3 options. We have object, edit, and pose mode. So pose is what we want. You can also get to pose mode with Control Tab. Will toggle you back and forth between object mode and pose mode. If you just hit Tab, it's not going to let you go into edit mode because this is a linked rig. It's a proxy rig. If you made the rig in this actual project file, then you would be able to go into edit mode on the rig, but we don't need to worry about that. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control Tab, go into pose mode. That's good. Now, if we look at all these bones, one thing about this rig is it can be difficult to tell when you have a bone highlighted. You see it does get a little bit brighter, but not much. So you have to pay attention to make sure you've got the right thing selected. You can also keep an eye up here on the top left, and it'll tell you which bone you have selected. Okay. Now this rig, if we go to the properties here, expand those out, it has a few options. We've got FK, IK controls. By default, it's on IK, which is what we're going to use. Just as a quick refresher, IK stands for inverse kinematics. And it means that if I grab the end bone in a chain, I can move it around and the whole leg follows. Okay. If we change this to FK by bringing this slider, FKIK.R stands for right, so right foot. If we bring that to 0, I can move that bone around, but it's not going to have an effect. I need to animate the rig by rotating individual joints. Okay. But I don't want to do that. I keep this relatively simple and keep this on IK. Right, and then we have knee targets as well. I'm gonna not worry about those. We should be fine. As is, they're by default far enough away. That will be fine. When we get into a more advanced rig, then we'll talk more about knee targets. Okay, so you'll also see if I select the foot, there's a stretch option. What this means is if I move the leg really far away, the leg will stretch to meet that. If I leave that at 0, it will not stretch. Okay, it will go as far as it can and then it will stop. I'm going to leave it on stretch, but we're not going to fully use it. I'm going to leave it on just if we need to accentuate something, but we're not going to be doing a super stretchy type rig. No stretch Armstrongs today. Okay, so we've got that set up. We're ready. We've got our animation controls. Now we need to set up our workspace. Now we can go into the animation workspace, and this gives us a couple of options here. This is kind of one default set. I'm going to modify this though. I don't want two camera views. So this left view, I'm going to change to the graph editor, and I'm just going to slide it over to the side. Just kind of collapse that down so it's there. And then we'll go into front view here. Okay. Then we can actually turn that back off again. Because I changed workspaces, some of my display options changed. Okay, a couple other things to go before we start moving bones around. The next thing is you can see that we've got a lot of bones here, and that's because we have our IK controls and our FK controls. See these deform bones? Thigh.def stands for deform or deformation. We don't need those. We're not going to be animating those, so we can hide those. And the way that we do that is we're going to go down to our armature properties here, and we've got layers. We've got bone layers. And for this rig, these bottom two layers are the deformation bones. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and click on both of those to hide them. Okay, and now we have fewer bones to worry about. Okay. So I'm just, yeah, okay, I'm not worried about that. So those are the bones that we need. Next up is setting up our automatic keyframing. Yeah, so down here on our timeline, kind of move this up here, we can see that we have our timeline is also here, but we really only need our controls. But on the left side of our controls, we have this record button. This is our automatic keying. Before we turn that on, I want to do a couple of things for setup. First, I'm going to select all my bones with A. Just tap A, make sure everything is selected. And I'm going to hit I and set a keyframe for location and rotation. This rig doesn't use scale for any transformations that we need, so we don't need to worry about that. See, it sets keyframes, and then here in our dope sheet, we've got keyframes set for every bone. These bones also are color coded. If you don't want that, you can go down to go here to View and click Show Group Colors and hide that. It's up to you if you like that or not. I will keep that off. I think the bright colors are a little bit distracting for my taste. And then the last thing that we can do before we turn on auto keying is, by default, if you turn on auto keying, anytime you move a bone, it's going to set a keyframe for location, rotation, and scale. It's going to set a keyframe for all values anytime you move it. But what you can do with Blender is you can choose a keying set. Excuse me. A keying set. So what's a keying set? A keying set is a kind of a preset list of values to keyframe. So you can set the keying set to be, say, location, and then anytime you move a bone, it will only set keyframes for the location. It won't set a keyframe for rotation or scale. Likewise, you can do that for rotation or just location and rotation. You can also set it to just to available. And because we've already set keyframes for location and rotation, available is only going to set those keyframes for the values that are already established. So that's good. And the last thing we need to do is in the keying menu down here, we also want to turn on auto keyframe insert keying set. This basically tells the auto keyframe to use the active keying set. So we're going to click on that icon. That's an important one. And then we can turn on our automatic keyframes. Okay. So we've got our scene set up. And I think we are actually ready to start animating. All right, just kidding. There's one more thing that we want to do, and that's I want to add some markers to our scene. So if we look at our reference, we've got these key poses, right? We have contact, down, passing position, up, and then contact for the other side. We're going to do a 1 second walk cycle, which is a pretty standard length. And this is 1 second at 24 frames a second. So it's really a 24 frame walk cycle. And for that, the spacing breaks down to the contact on frame 1, the down on frame 4, passing position on frame 7, up position on frame 10, and the opposite contact on frame 13. And then as you would go forward, another 3 frames would be, frame 17 would be the down, and so on. So I want to lay out those markers here so that we can all clearly see what frame we're working on, and it just hopefully will be more clear for everybody. So the way we're going to do that, I'm going to, in my dope sheet, yeah, we'll do it in the dope sheet. I'm actually going to change the dope sheet here to action editor, and we can call this Bali_walk. I'm going to hit Control S to save it. Okay. Now on frame 1, I'm going to hit M. It's going to add a mark. And then if I move the mouse down to the marks, I can hit Control M and rename it to contact. Okay. I'm going to set my timeline duration to end on frame 24. And we're going to bring this way in so that we're just looking at the frames that we need. Okay. So we can see every frame here. Now we're going to go to frame 4. We're going to hit M and then Control M, and we're going to rename this. It's going to be our down. Frame 7. You can also, actually, can you right click? Maybe you can't right click on them. I thought you might have been able to, but I guess not. Okay. So Control M, and this is going to be passing. Then frame 10 here. M. It's going to be our up. All right. Then we can grab our contact. Go over here, select it, Shift D to duplicate it, drag it over to frame 13. And then I can grab the down. Actually, I'm going to undo that because we can just select all of these at the same time by holding down Shift. Shift D. And I'm going to move it all the way over. We're going to put the contact on frame 13. Okay. I'm also turn on screencast keys. When I switched workspaces, this, I guess, turned off or something. I don't know. Let's make sure that that's, yep, okay, good. Then I need to grab this contact again, duplicate it one more time, and drag it over. Come on. There it goes. Drag this over to frame 25. Okay, so this contact is actually going to be the same as frame 1 because this is going to be a cycle. We want that. We're going to need the curves in the graph editor to kind of have the proper interpolation so they loop cleanly. Okay. I'll also note that this walk cycle is going to be walking in place. It's going to be a treadmill walk cycle. He's not actually going to be walking across the ground just because it's going to be a little bit easier to keep everything looking good. Okay. So next, what I want to do is just block out the action. Okay, we're going to start with the bare minimum. Then we will slowly add some complexity. I will also make the disclaimer this time, I am not a professional character animator. I have done some character animation. It is not my strong suit. But I, at least in this video, can show you enough to be dangerous and enough to start practicing. And to start to understand how to manipulate rigs. Because really the only way you get better is by doing it, and doing it a lot. So keep animating, and you will get better. Okay. All that out of the way. I'm going to grab my right foot contact, or leg control.r. Right, okay. That's what we're going to start with. So I'm going to go into the side, or front view, number pad 1. It's going to bring me to the side view of the character. I know that's a little bit confusing, but number pad 1. So this is what we're looking at. And we're going to do this contact pose. Okay, so here is kind of the extreme version of that. We're not going to go quite that extreme. Again, this is where you can look at your animation references. If we look at our animation reference here. Oh, I went a little bit farther. Okay, that's more or less the contact pose right there. All right, and we can compare those. Okay. So it's not quite as stretched out there. And there's a little bit of a bend in the knee. And again, if we're looking at, this translating into the Bali character, Anything above the waist we don't need to worry about. So we're just talking about hips, knee, ankle, and foot. Okay, so you can see the angle of the foot isn't quite as extreme. There's still a little bit of a bend in the leg, which we don't see in this reference drawing. The back leg, there's not much of a bend, but I think we'll probably add a little bit. We'll go from there. Right? This is just the blocking phase. We're not locking ourselves into anything specifically. Okay, so let's grab this base foot control, and I'm going to hit G, and actually I'm going to switch this to local orientations. Okay, and then I'm going to hit G and Y. You see, because we're in local orientation, it's the Y direction that we need to move. Now, the reason why I'm in local orientation, even though it looks like I'm moving on the global X axis, you can see the global X is left and right now, but the local is Y, and that's because we rotated our character 90 degrees at the start. If I do this in global and hit G and X, okay, that might make more sense here, but if we look at our transform here, it's still affecting the Y channel of the rig. Okay, so it's kind of pick which one is going to work better for your brain, having the directions line up with the global, or if we go to local, then your transform directions are lining up with what you're actually keyframing. So that's what we're going to stick with. Okay, G, Y, and we're going to bring it forward just a little bit. Right. Something like that. Now it's going to be stretched a little bit, but we are going to bring the hips down. We're also going to add some rotation. So if I grab this little heel control right here, we rotate this up. You see that takes some of that stretch out. We are also going to bring the hips down a little bit, so that's going to give us some bend back in the legs. We want to make sure that we're paying attention not just to the bones that we're animating, but how that affects the whole body and the whole chain that we're animating. Okay, we'll grab the back leg, and again, GY. I'll move back to about there. Now for this one, the way that this rig is set up, and rigs are set up differently. Sometimes when you move this backbone and you rotate it up, it bends at the ball of the foot and the toes stay flat. This rig doesn't work that way. So I'm going to grab this pivot bone right here. I'm going to rotate that up to something like that. And then I can come in here, grab the toe, rotate that. We zoom in here, get the toe so it's flat on the ground. And I know it dips underneath the ground. I'm not going to worry about that. We're gonna pretend that it's okay. All right. So we've got that. That's our first, or the beginning of our first post. I do also want to grab the torso control here. I want to add some rotation. We don't want to just rotate or animate from the side view, even though it's where we'll spend most of our time. We also need to consider the front and, really all sides. But here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit R and let's see. No, not Z, not X, Y. Y is what we want. I'm going to rotate this forward somewhere around, looks like 12 degrees is pretty decent. Okay. So now the hips are rotated towards the foot that is forward, which is what we want. Okay. So no animation yet because we haven't, we've only animated one frame. But I think we're looking pretty good to start. Yeah. Okay, so now what I want to do, I'm going to select, well, we already have everything, a keyframe for everything because we did that at the beginning. But if you don't have a key for everything, I'm just going to hit I and make sure we've got a keyframe for everything. And then I can grab these keyframes in the action editor and hit Shift D to duplicate them. And I'm going to drag them all the way over to frame 25, which is where our contact pose is. And for some reason, our marker went away, so let's add that back. Okay. Okay. So we're starting and ending at the same point, which is why we're not seeing any animation. We've got this contact pose in the middle. And what we can do here is with Blender, we can copy and paste keyframes, but we can also copy and paste them mirrored. So if we hit Control Shift V, oops, let me undo that. Go to frame 1, and we select everything up here in the 3D view. Hit Control C to copy. I'm going to go to frame 13, Control Shift V. You see that paste it in the opposite way. And so it pasted the rotation, the feet switched, and it doesn't look like anything switched because it's, it's the exact mirror. But you can see the colors shift, which means the bones are in different spots. And if we play, now we have some animation. It's terrible animation, but it's the first step. And your animations will look terrible before they look good. But that's where we begin. Okay, now we're going to go and we're going to break down this further. We'll just go to our, we'll go to the, we'll go to the passing position. Actually, no, we're gonna go to the down position. We'll go here. Doesn't really matter. I think we'll do down. Okay. So for the down, again, if we look at our reference here, the down we've got the front foot is flat on the ground, the knees bent a bit, and then the back leg comes up. We're not going to go up this high. That's a bit extreme, but that is where we will begin. All right. So this front foot here, I'm going to grab this rotation bone that we rotated earlier. I'm going to hit Alt-R. It's going to clear that rotation. And we need to move this back a little bit. So we're going to hit G and Y. We're going to move this back. Like that, I think. Let's make sure I'm going to hit Alt-R on that, because we had a little bit of rotation there. And we're Alt-R on that. I'm going to clear those rotations. Okay, so that's flat on the ground. That's good. And then we've got the back feet. I'm going to move this. GY, we're going to move this back to something like that. And it's going to be stretched for now, but we are going to move the body down. Okay, that's the other thing to kind of keep an eye on here, is that we have, on top of the legs bending and all of that, we've actually got the body moving up and down through the cycle. So that's why the down pose is called the down pose, because that's the lowest point of the walk. Okay. Oops. Back to side view here. Okay. So now I'm going to make sure I'm going to hit Alt-R and I'm going to clear that rotation. I'm going to make sure that our Z location is at 0, and it is. Now I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to rotate this up quite a bit. Something like that, maybe. Then I'll grab the toe and rotate that back flat. Okay. Maybe rotate this up a little bit too. Maybe not. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. Now let's go to the passing pose. So passing pose. See the, in this case, the right leg is pretty much in line with the body, more or less right under the center of mass. And then the opposite leg is up and bent and is carrying through. Okay. So let's work on that. Okay. So again, I want this foot. I'm going to clear the rotation on the right. Alt-R, Alt-R, Alt-R. I want that flat on the ground. And we'll grab the base foot here. And actually looks like we're in a pretty good spot. Maybe we'll move it back a little bit further, but not much. Okay. And then I'm going to grab this foot here, and we're going to pull this up somewhere over here. Okay. We can Alt-R and clear the rotation on the toe. And maybe we'll hit Alt-R on that, and we'll just rotate this. No, just kidding. I think we will rotate this one instead. Okay. Yeah, because I don't want to... See, we've got some heel-toe roll there, but I'd rather it rotated around here. And then we don't want this actually to be up too high. Like I said, we're going to go a little bit more subtle with this one. Something like... Oops. We want to make sure we're moving with the base and we're rotating with the pivot. So let me grab the base here and we'll move that down. Okay. So let's see how that's looking. All right, I think that probably works. Okay, now we'll do the up, and once more, we'll look at this. So the up, we can see that the back foot starts to come up on the toes, the knee comes up on the opposite side, as it gets ready to land. Okay. So we're going to grab this back foot, and we'll move this back a little bit further. Actually, we may not need to move it back much further, because it's already interpolating between the two keyframes. If anything, we might move this a little bit more forward. Just a little bit. Okay. And then as far as rotation up on the heel, this is almost certainly something that we're going to adjust later. I'll bring it up a little bit. Actually, let's see. Come from flat, and we end up here. Maybe we'll go down a little bit. We'll rotate it just a little bit. And again, I want to try to pay attention to this knee. Yeah, once we start moving the body around, we'll come back and fiddle with that, tweak it. Okay. And then here, we're going to move this forward as that gets ready to land. But Alt-R on that, Alt-R on that. Something like that, maybe. Bring this up. Okay. So let's see how that feels. Okay. It's not great, but we're getting there. So what I want to do now, we want to copy those over to the other side. So let me grab all of those bones. So it's 4 for each foot. I don't need to grab this one. I can deselect that. On my down, I'm going to hit, first I'm going to hit I. Make sure that we have keyframes set for all the channels. You can see in some of these we don't have a keyframe for like the left leg. We didn't end up setting a keyframe for the really anything there. So I'm just going to hit I. So we make sure we have keyframes for all of those. All right. Now, on frame 4, this down, I'm going to hit Control C to copy those bones selected in the viewport. Then I'm going to go to frame 16, which is going to be the opposite down. And I'm going to hit Control Shift V. That's going to paste mirrored. Okay, so we've done that. Now we're going to go to frame 7. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to hit Control C to copy. Go to the other passing pose, Control Shift V, and paste. You see as we toggle back and forth, these are identical, so that's great. I'm going to go to frame 10, same thing, Control C to copy. Then to frame 22, Control Shift V to paste. And that's looking great. All right, so let's zoom out here a little bit and hit play. That's not terrible. Certainly looks a lot better now that we have all of our key poses in there. But this is the very kind of basic, just the pose animation. Look at it from the front. See, there's a little wobble, but we're definitely missing some motion here. So let's add some verticality to this. Do some up and down sorts of motion. Okay, so first, we'll grab our torso control here, and we want to move this in the local Y direction. All right. So, like we know that the down pose is going to be the lowest point. Let's grab that, and we'll go down. And we don't want to go too far. We don't have to give some bend there. I'm also going to switch this to the graph editor. Okay, so we can just change this here to the graph editor. Actually, I think I'll do that. You can also swap windows. I go back to, whoops, go back to the dope sheet. Come on. Go back to the dope sheet. If you hover over the corner of a window, hold down Control, click and drag to another window, you can swap those windows, which is pretty cool, but I'm actually gonna, I'll just do it through the menu. Yeah, let's do it through the menu. Gives me a little bit more screen space. I'm just gonna pull this up a little bit so we can see our curves a little bit better. Okay, so it's the Y location that we're animating, so I'm going to hide all of the other curves here. Just going to double click on that Y location and then hover over the graph editor, hit number pad period, and zoom in so I can see my curve. Okay, so here's my lowest point. And then in our passing position, if we look at our reference here, and you can see down, and the passing position is a little bit above our contact, and then up is even higher, our tallest point, then we go back to our contact. Okay. So passing position, we're going to go G, oops, there we go, G and Y, go up a little bit. I don't want to go too far. I don't want the knee to straighten out completely. That would be not good. So actually, let's go to the up. Let's do that one first. We'll do our extremes, then we'll tweak the passing position. Okay, so we're going to G and Y, go just a little bit. Again, I want to keep the knees bent. I don't want to go completely straight. It can look really weird if you just have like one frame of the leg straight. Go up just a little bit here. And then our passing position, we are going to go up a bit, not much. I might actually just need to bring everything down. Okay. There's the down. Yeah, you can see how we've got a leg straightens out there for a second. I don't really want that. I want to avoid that. So let's grab both of these. I'm also going to grab this first. We'll just grab everything except for that last pose. And I'm just going to hit the graph editor G and Y to lock it to the vertical axis here in the graph editor. Let me just drag it down until we get to a point that we like. Okay. All right, so once we have that, that's the first step. And then this happens again for the next step, for the other foot. And everything's the same, so we can really just take those keyframes, hit Shift D to duplicate them, hit X to lock them to the horizontal axis, and drag them across until they snap onto the appropriate markers. All right, got that. Better. Definitely got more life in our animation. Now we also want to make sure that these grab these contact poses. I'm going to bring these down. G and Y. I'm going to bring those below the up. Put the keyframe over that so we can see that. Okay. Now, for the loop, we want to make sure that these are consistent. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to select the first and the last keyframe, hit number pad period, and change the pivot point to the individual centers. And then we're going to rotate those so they're in line and nice and smooth. Actually, you can see that these aren't in line at all. We want the center one to be in line with it as well. So I'm going to take the center one here. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, X to constrain it. I'm going to paste it right there. And I'll hit Shift D, X, and I'll paste it there. So now all three of these are the same, although it didn't want that rotation to also copy, and it's not copying the rotation. All right, so instead, we'll just So just grab those two and we'll rotate those. As long as they're rotated the same, this will loop cleanly and won't get any extra jerkiness there. Okay, that's actually looking pretty good. Yeah, we just want to make sure that that loop is smooth. Okay, so we've got the up and down motion. We've got some rotation there. Let's also smooth out. Actually, no. Let's stay on the hips while we're here. Okay, and we'll go into the front view here. So number pad 3. We'll start looking at this front side. Okay. So if we're talking about weight distribution, this is where reference can really help. We'll look back here at our reference video. Look at how his weight shifts as he walks. This is the real-time version. Let me go back to the slow motion one. Here we go. So watch how his hips shift. As his weight goes down, the body moves left and right. Okay, so that's what we want to be replicating next. Okay. So this is going to be, we select our root bone here, G and X. It's going to be our X translation. Now, obviously, we don't want to go this much, but that's the direction that we're going. And the passing position here, this is where the weight's going to be the most over our leg. So I'm going to grab this. Let's look at our X location. Oh, let's also, sorry, view, turn off group colors. I'm going to read that much clearer now. Sorry about that. Okay. So on our passing position, G, X, we're going to bring the weight over this foot. Now, how far over you go depends on a lot of things. It depends on the mood of your character. It depends on the weight of your character. It depends on the style of your animation, if you're going for more cartoony versus more realistic. Now, any of these kind of attributes, don't so much worry about the numbers, because it will vary depending on the attitude and the character that you're animating. But there should still certainly be some sort of motion in most of these directions. I'm going to go over a little bit here, like that. And then over to the other passing position. Instead of hitting G and X and trying to copy that, we can just grab this keyframe, duplicate it, hit X to bring it over to the passing position here. And then we just need to go to the X position up here, delete that negative, make it a positive. And now we're at the same. Now the values look different because we've got some extra keyframes, but we don't need these two keyframes. So I'm just going to select those two, hit X, and delete those keyframes. And now we've got this lovely little sine wave. Right there. Okay, so we've got the weight shifting back and forth and up and down, and it's rotating. That's looking pretty great. Let's look at from this side. That's looking good. We can even kind of orbit our view around. See that we are playing back at 24 frames a second, so we are playing back real time, which is nice. Okay. All right. So the next thing that I want to fix is going to be a really quick fix. But I want to make sure the feet are sliding smoothly. So I'm going to grab this foot right here, and I just hide all the other channels except for the Y location. Select everything, number pad period. And when the foot is on the ground, we want that to slide smoothly. Okay. So that's from contact to down is for the last frame that this lifts up. So all the keyframes in the middle, we can just delete. And then I'm going to grab these two. Actually, I'm just going to grab this keyframe right here. Hit V. It's going to bring up my interpolation. Sorry, not V. I want T. I want just to set this keyframe to linear. Okay. You can also do that if we go to key and interpolation mode and linear, if you prefer menus. But T is the keyframe we're looking for. And now it's going to slide back smoothly. Okay, nice and smooth. Whereas if we looking at the red, we can see that it's sliding nice and smooth. If you look at the green, you can see it's not quite as smooth. So let's do the same thing to the green. Now, this is offset by 12 frames because it's the other step. So it's going to be a little bit tricky. Double click on that. And we've got our contact pose right here. So this is where it hits the ground. And then it lets go on the next down. Not this one, but all the way over here. It loops back around. Okay, so we're going to have to do this in two parts. I'm going to grab these three keyframes, and we're going to delete those. Select this key, hit T, and set it to linear. And then I'm going to grab this keyframe right here and set that to linear. Okay, so it's going to be consistently looped all the way through. Okay, so that's nice and smooth now as well. Okay, so now we've got decent animation here. We're definitely getting somewhere. Not there yet, but we're definitely getting somewhere. Well, he's not getting anywhere. He's walking in place. But we're getting somewhere. Okay. So, next up is where we're going to start adding some complexity to this. Okay, we've got the base walk, but now we need to start thinking about secondary motion, overlapping action, that sort of thing. And I think we'll start with the head again because that's probably the simplest one to start with. We've already got the back and forth motion. We've got the vertical motion. There's not going to be any motion in this direction with the head. And then as far as rotation is concerned, we've got the twisting as the legs go forward and back. There's not going to be any tilting side to side. It's not going to be tilting this way. Okay, none of... actually, yes, there is. Just kidding. I forgot. Yes, there absolutely is going to be that tilting. But we're not going to do that just yet. The next one we're going to do is the overlapping action of the head tilting in this direction. There's going to be R and X in the local axis here. All right. So the way this is going to look, it's going to be at its most extreme in one direction on the down phase right here. So the body is coming down. Okay, so we want the head to be running counter to that and up. Okay, that's going to be not a ton, but something like that. Make sure we're looking at the correct graph here. And then we're going to jump over to, actually, we'll just Shift D to duplicate that, hit X, don't constrain it to the X, or the horizontal direction. Paste that on the other down. Okay, that's good. And now the passing position here, we're going to rotate it the other way. So we're going to rotate it down just a little bit, not quite as far, something like that. I think that will work. So that's going to help it kind of snap. And we're going to, because of this quick change in direction, we're going to feel the weight of that hitting. Okay, you can see that little quick movement there. It just helps give that some weight. And then the up is, we can rotate it here again, like I have been doing. I can also, in this, actually, just want to make sure that we're not, actually, no, leave that alone. I'm not going to mess with that. Yeah, sorry. In the graph editor here, I can grab this key, and as you can hit G and Y to move it vertically. Okay, you see that that is also affecting it. So you got to animate in whichever method you prefer. We'll do something like that. And then I can grab these two keyframes, Shift D and X, and bring those over. Okay. And now what I want to do is grab the beginning and end keyframes. And we're going to rotate these kind of in line, something like that. That's looking pretty good. Okay, I'm going to take these two and I'm going to scale them up a little bit. I'm also going to grab these two keyframes and rotate those around. Scale those up a little bit too. Okay, it's going to sharpen this a bit. Oh, we can also grab these. We can rotate these a little bit and maybe move them up so it's smoothing out that curve a little bit too. Might have gone a little too far on these. Okay. That's feeling better. Yeah. Okay. So the last one then is, if we go back to our front view here, number pad 3, is there's going to be some additional weight, oops, in this direction, some shift in this direction. And that's caused by when your weight goes over this foot that's on the ground, it's actually going to push that hip up. So that's what I want to cover next. And that's going to be the Z rotation. So I'm going to turn that on. See, there's a little bit of rotation here already. I'm not entirely sure why that is. But we're going to adjust it anyway. So on the down phase, we're going to actually want quite a bit of rotation here. We're going to go about 4 degrees. I know I said quite a bit, that's at 4, but it's a healthy amount of rotation there. Number pad period to kind of frame that up. Okay, and while that's still down, I don't want it snapping back to horizontal right away. So I'll go to the next key pose, the passing position. And I'm just going to grab this keyframe and we'll just move it down, not quite all the way. Something like that. Okay. Then our up we'll leave where it is. Let's grab our down and our passing. Let's copy them over to the other side. So this is one where we don't want to just move it over. And again, make sure that we're staying on the markers that we have set. But we actually need this to, see, now it's like looking off balance. Okay, we also need to invert these. So we can go back up here and we can invert the Z rotation. We can also, if we right click, or not right click, sorry. Press period, and we can change the pivot point to the 2D cursor. And that's this blue line and the vertical line here. And you can see if we shift right click, we can move that around. You can also go to hit N, and we've got our cursor here. We want to make sure the Y is set to 0. And now we can scale in the Y direction -1, and it'll flip those. Okay, so this works just like the 3D cursor does in the 3D viewport. You can scale around it as long as you set the pivot point, and you set that pivot point either over here in this menu right here, or hitting period, not on your number pad, just on the regular keyboard. Press period and change your pivot point to what you want. Okay, you can hit N to hide that. All right, so I've got that. Now, it's looking pretty good. This contact, we'll grab these 2 contact points. We're going to move these down a little bit. Okay, so just going to kind of ease into it. And then I'm going to select this one, Shift D to duplicate it, hit X, copy this over to the other contact, and then this one we want to make sure we invert. Oops. Make sure we move our playhead first. Invert that. There we go. Okay, and then I want to hit V. I'm going to set this to aligned. Oops. Oh, we want to also set our pivot point back to individual centers. There we go. I just want to flatten that out. There we go. That's looking pretty good. And these are flat, which is what I want. Yeah, so let's hit play there. Okay. That might be a little bit on the extreme side. Maybe not. Actually, I don't think the rotation is the extreme one. I think it might be motion. I don't know. Kind of looks good from most angles. So I will leave that for now then. And that's about all the animation we need to do for the kind of the hips part. So now what we're going to do is focus on adding that secondary motion and overlapping motion to the feet. I'm only going to worry about one foot. I'm only going to worry about the right foot. And then at the end, we will copy all of that animation that we do over to the other foot. So, like I said, we're going to start on the right foot here. And the first thing that I want to do is add some toe flop. So, select everything and kind of frame it up. Right over here. Okay, so we've got our contact pose. And then we've got the foot coming down. But you see that it's coming down as a unit. There's no independent motion for the toe. So that's what we're going to add. I'm going to jump forward 2 frames here. I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to hit Alt-R to clear that rotation. But I'm going to grab the toe again, and going to rotate that up. So it's going to basically add some drag to that. Okay. Now, what I want to do, that's kind of the drag. That's the secondary motion almost. But I also want to add some anticipation to that. And so the way that we're going to do that, it's a combination of anticipation and then just further drag. Because this foot, and we have to kind of loop around here, but this foot is coming through from the back. So there's going to be some drag already. So I'm going to rotate the toe down a little bit. I'll do the same thing here in the passing position. I'm going to rotate that toe. I don't really have any room to rotate that down further, so I'll leave that there. But here we're going to rotate that down a little bit. And then on the contact, I'm going to grab oops, I want to make sure I'm rotating the right thing. Oh, that was the location I wanted. The rotation. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to grab the first and last contact, because remember these need to be the same so that it loops clearly. I'm going to bring that down a little bit too. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a toe drag there. Now you can see that toe is really feeling much more alive. And you can compare that to how the green toe is falling and how stiff that feels in comparison. Okay. Let's see if we can play this back at a slower speed. Can we play this back at a slower speed? Might just actually have to go up to my scene properties and we'll set the frame rate to a custom value of 12. There we go. So now here as it is at half speed. See the red foot comes down with some life and some motion. The green foot comes down just solidly as one like rigid piece, which is much more dull. Okay, so I'll set this back to 24 frames a second. Okay. All right. So it'll take some time to kind of develop your eye for this sort of thing, although at this point you've all been doing some animation both in this class and other animation classes, so hopefully you're already feeling pretty good about what feels good as far as secondary motion and overlapping motion is concerned. So that's that side of it. Now let's look at this side where the toe comes off the ground. Right now, with the way that the curves are animated by default, we've got the foot being bent here in the down, and then in the passing when it lifts up, it just goes straight forward, which isn't really how that works for feet. Right, we need this to kind of curl off the ground. So let's do that. I'm going to go, oh, I should also note that for the most part, aside from this little toe flop here that we added on frame 3, we're adding all the keyframes on the same frames. We're not really deviating from that, because it just makes things easier to manage. Right, when we start grabbing everything and we start looking at all of our animation curves, it can get really busy really quick. I mean, I've got a bunch of curves hidden right now. So in an effort to not kind of overwhelm yourself, try not to add keys on a bunch of different frames. Try to keep them all lined up, especially if we look at, let's say we look at just the head. Especially want to make sure that in a single bone, we're adding all the keyframes to the same frames. We don't want to add, look at everything here. Okay, we don't want to keyframe, for instance, the X, let's do something a little bit easier to see. So this Y rotation. We don't want to keyframe the Y rotation on frames 1, 4, and 7, and then take the Z rotation and keyframe those on 2, 5, and 8. All right, then they wouldn't line up, and that would just become a mess of keyframes. Keep it simple, keep things aligned whenever possible. If you need to add the occasional odd keyframe here and there, that's fine, but try not to. Usually you won't have to. Okay. So back to this foot here. So we're going around here, and we want this to kind of curl off the ground. So I do need to add in one more pose here. And what we need to do is first we need to move this back a little bit further. It's still going to be on the ground. So let's do that. I'm going to zoom in here to the graph. This is the Y location graph for the foot. Okay. I'm going to set this key to be linear as well. Then I'm going to move this up and down until that's in line, right? So we want this to line up like it's a continuation. Something like that will be good. Okay. So we've got that. Now we're going to be going back and forth between these frames quite a bit here. We can also use the left and right arrow keys to jump between frames. You can also use the up and down to jump between keyframes. as kind of a refresher. I know it's a while ago since we covered animation in Blender, especially for those of you that learned Maya. So up and down, left and right will let you jump around there. So if we go back and forth here, I want this to be rotated even further. So I'm going to grab the heel control here, going to rotate that up even more, and rotate this right there. Okay, so we've got that. Select everything and frame that up so we can see it all. Zoom out a little bit here. I want to see how the whole body is kind of reacting to this. Okay, so we can see that like when we let go, or after 17 on 18, the way that this foot follows through is weird. So we're going to need to adjust that for sure. I think what I might do this is the part of animation which, again, I'm sure those of you who have animated before know you just kind of stare at an animation over and over again until you figure out what you need to do. That's the part of this that I'm on. So I think we will... What I might do, actually, is... Let's see. Might just need to push that around a little bit more. So I'm going to go... Just kind of rotate this down a little bit. Move this a little bit. Let's see how that feels better. That doesn't feel quite as jerky. And again, I'm just looking at the red foot. I'm not looking at the green foot. We're getting a little bit of a snap here. Okay, so I want to try to smooth that out as much as I can. So we can... Let's see. Let's look at what's going on with this right here. I think I'm just going to grab this keyframe and we'll move it down a little bit. I think that's going to be better, and then we can grab this toe. I'll rotate it back down so that the toe's on the ground. Again, I'm not worried about this little bit that's going underneath the ground. That feels better. It doesn't feel like it's snapping nearly as much there. The knee feels like it might be snapping a little bit. I think it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pose right here. Oh yeah, I think we need to just kind of dial this back a little bit. And this rig is a little bit weird with how the foot works. We're kind of almost counter-rotating this. kind of bring that back a little bit. Bring this down. See what that looks like. No, I don't like that. Let's undo that. All right, I think I'm going to rotate this back a little bit. I'll rotate these down. I'll smooth that out a little bit more. So I'm looking at how the heel is moving, but I'm also looking at the thigh, because I don't want that to be snapping around all over the place. That feels pretty good. Yeah, that feels pretty good. And you can kind of compare that, and we'll look at this again in slow motion. Okay. So we can look at how the red foot, hit the mic, sorry. How the red foot, which is the right foot, how that moves at the end versus how the green foot, it's a little bit smoother, especially right after the foot picks up. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay. Last thing we can kind of look at here is we go back to this foot over here, or the right foot as it lands. Let's look at our, I believe, is it Z? Yes, it's Z location. Right at the end, if we think about this as it's falling to the ground, I'm just going to grab this last little keyframe here. We're going to hit V and set it to vector. And that way it'll just kind of fall. It'll hit the ground with a little bit more authority there. Oh, let's go back to real time as well. 24 frames a second. We'll zoom out. Okay, it's subtle, but it's going to hit that ground with a little bit more force. Okay. And you don't really need to copy that over to the first, because it's just going to be flat after that. Let me check my notes here. I think that's everything that we need to take care of before we swap this back over. Oh, no, there's one more thing. I'm going to grab the base foot here, and we're going to look at the X location. Okay. And I just want to move it in. I don't want the stride to be quite so wide. So I'm going to grab the whole graph and hit G and Y. Now, you can see as I move this around, nothing's happening. And that's because we're really far zoomed in on this graph. So we need to zoom way out. Way out. We don't really want to zoom out in one direction. So I just want to drag vertically. Okay, now we can see that we're getting some numbers back in the graph. And now we can hit G and Y. And I'm just going to move that in a little bit. Something like negative 0.02. Now, the reason why I did this all at once, or did this in the graph editor, is because if I did this up here in the viewport, it would just set a keyframe on that one frame. It wouldn't change all of the frames. So that's why I did that. Okay. So now that we have that, I think we're ready to copy all of our changes over to the other foot. So the way that I'm going to do that is first let me just grab all of my bones in the foot, which is these 4 bones. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm going to turn everything on here. Okay, that's all good. I'm going to swap this from the graph editor over to the dope sheet action editor here. Now you can see that on some of these frames, we don't have keyframes for everything. I want to make sure everything's got a keyframe just to make things easier. So any frame that's got a frame, I'm just going to hover over it, hit I. Just make sure that we've got keyframes everywhere that we need them. Okay, I think we're good now. All right, so now before we copy those over, we want to do a little bit of, do we need to do the cleanup? We don't really need to do the cleanup. We can either do it before and after, or after. It doesn't really matter. Basically, I just want to get rid of all the channels that I'm not animating, just to keep things simple. It's kind of an optional step for an animation that's this simple. So I guess we'll do that at the end. Okay, so I got everything selected here. I'm going to hit Control C to copy it all, and this is in the viewport. I'm going to hit Controls. Actually, we want to do this in the. I think you're going to do this in the action editor. Copy it. I'm going to grab these bones on the opposite foot, the same 4 bones, but the opposite foot. And I'm going to delete all the keyframes except for the first ones. And hit X, delete keyframes. And then I'm going to hit Control Shift V to paste. It's going to paste it mirrored. Okay, so now what's going to happen is if we look at this, they're going to be lined up. Now, it's not perfectly lined up, and that's because the body is rotating independent, but the feet are perfectly lined up, which looks ridiculous, but it means that the copy worked, and that's good. All we have to do now is offset these frames by 12, offset these keys by 12 frames. It's a 24 frame cycle. So we offset them, and then everything will work beautifully. So with everything selected here in the dope sheet, just hit A once to make sure that it got it all selected. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to drag it over, and so that the first keyframe of my duplication is right on frame 25. Okay, so it's copying that perfectly. And now we can select all of that, hit G -12 to move it back 12 frames. Okay, so now we've got that copied in there. All right. Now, just to make sure that this stays like a clean cycle, on frame 1, I'm going to hit I. Just make sure we've got keyframe set, and on frame 25, I'm going to hit I in the viewport and make sure that we have keyframe set, and then we can delete all the keyframes before and after. Okay. And now we'll play that back. I'm going to turn off the overlays. I'm going to zoom out here. There's our front view. Here's our side view. So we're basically there. A little bit of cleanup stuff that we can do though. We'll bring our overlays back. First, we're going to grab the feet and go back to our graph editor. And this Y location again, I'm going to hide all the other channels. Select everything, number pad 0. And again, I'm just going to grab all the keyframes that we don't need, hit X and delete those, so we just have a linear motion there. Same thing on the opposite foot. All the keyframes that we don't need, get rid of those, make sure everything stays linear. Okay, so we've got that. We also want to look at, on our copied foot, all the rotations, which, if we look at this, the only rotations that we actually have changing is the X rotation. And that applies for this toe control, the pivot, and this heel control. All of them were only animating the X rotation. So we can get rid of all the keyframes for the rest. Okay, so I'm just going to go, I'll show you two ways to do that. First way is up here in the transform. Over location, we can right click and hit clear keyframes. It's going to clear all location keyframes. And then under rotation, we can right click on the Y and click clear single keyframes. And it'll just get rid of that one channel. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. You can also do that in here in the graph editor. We can just grab all the channels we don't need and hit X. But you can actually see, okay, no, it did. It just had to update the update the slider and all that went away. This is purple because there's a driver on this. I don't know actually if the driver is doing anything useful, but it's not hurting anything, so we'll just leave it there. Okay, so we've got all of that one. We're going to go around to all 4 of these bones on each foot and do the same thing. Just get rid of anything that we're not animating. So on these, again, on this bone, get rid of all location and the Y and the Z rotation. Good, good. And then on this bone, we are only animating location, so we can get rid of all the rotation. Okay, so that base foot bone, leg control, we can get rid of all the rotations. So same thing over here. On the base foot bone, we can get rid of the rotations, and then on everything else, we can get rid of everything except for the X rotation. Yeah, it's just going to clean things up, make things a little bit faster. That's good, that's good, that's good, and that's good. Okay, so we've got that. Then also on these bones, because we copied and offset them, we just want to make sure that it's cycling all right. So just looking at the first and the last frame. So like here, what we might do is select both of these, just rotate them around. Something like that. Just make sure you have them both selected and your pivot point is set to individual centers. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So, I mean, walk cycles are kind of tricky. And one of the things that you want to watch out for is any knee popping, with just like caused by sudden big changes. So this is looking pretty good. I will, however, show you a less successful walk cycle here. If I play this, you can see that this knee is kind of looks unstable. And that's just because first of all, this is a more extreme animation. But you can kind of see how it's not smoothly moving. And if we just look at the thigh here, so I'm just going to frame this up, just watch this thigh and how this moves. Okay, you can see that that's really the issue, is that it's kind of bouncing all over the place. And it should be smoothly swinging back. Okay, so if we go back to this version here, we'll look at that same framing. See that that's much smoother. Okay, so we want to keep an eye on that as you're going and making sure that you're smoothing those out. This is the 4th walk cycle that I have done today. All right, so it takes some time. Now as far as this recording is concerned, we are at an hour and a half. That took longer than I thought. Sorry about that. But it takes time. Don't be afraid to just restart. Yeah, there's our walk cycle. Now, if you want to render this, actually, before we do that, I will mention that this rig does have some squash and stretch in it. So if we wanted to animate some of that, you could. I'm not going to worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. But it is in there. But if we want to actually render this, what we need to do first, actually we don't even need to add a camera, because we can just do a play blast animation. So I'm going to turn off overlays, and I'm going to go into this view right here. We can add a ground plane if we need to, so we can add just a plane on the ground. Scale it up. I'll just double it in size. And I will give it a new material and just make it slightly darker. Okay. So if we want to render this, or do just a quick export as a play blast animation, then what we can do is make sure that our dimensions are set the way we want them, our frame start and end is set the way we want to, and then for output, we're going to set our output to our project folder. Okay, that'll be fine. And we're going to change the file format to FFmpeg video. And then for encoding, we've got a preset option here, H.264 in MP4. Once we have that set, then, in our file here, we can also, I'm going to call this poly walk record, and then I'll hit underscore because it's going to add the frame numbers after it. Click accept. We can also turn on metadata and make sure that our frame count is on. Anything else we can turn off, but that'll set our frame count on it. And then we go to view, viewport, not viewport, viewport render animation right here. And then it'll go through and render the animation based on whatever your view is set to. And once it's done, it will open it up, and this is what you get. And then you just play it back and make sure you have loop set in VLC or whatever you're using to play it back. And that's what you'll get. Also, it looks like I probably should have done 4K rendering because my monitor is tiny. But that's how you can do a quick export. Again, you don't really need to do that for class because I'm just going to be looking at them in Blender anyway. But there's the hour-and-a-half version of how to do a walk cycle. Let me know if you have any questions on that. And I will see you Thursday. Sorry this video is a little bit late to go up, but you got it now.